pleasure to have a chance to talk to David Paskett. David, when and where were you born?
I was born in Potter's Bar,
Really?
outside North London, yes.
And when?
1944.
You won't remember your birth, but let's go back a bit. Tell me something about your ancestry. Most people go back to their grandparents, but if you want to go further back, that's fine.
I suppose the important ancestors, if you like. I mean, people ask me with my family, were there any artists in my family? You know, it was anybody I take after, and my father was a quiet man. He worked as an aircraft engineer for de Havilland's and then Hawker Siddeley. And he would go off on his motorbike, and he would come home, and he had a slight stutter, and he was everybody thought he was, a very nice man, and he played the violin in a little orchestra, but we had to really, my sister and I, was one sister, we had to encourage him to do this. And my mother wasn't a musical, she wasn't artistic. There were no art books as such in the house. Because I could draw well. That was my thing. That was my thing. If I went to the cinema, for example, in the days when we didn't, television had just started. There wasn't much on television. If I wanted to find inspiration, I would go to the library and get books with lots of pictures in, go to the cinema, and when I came back from the cinema, I would draw the thing that I'd seen and make noises and kind of relive it. So drawing for me was a way then of kind of reinforcing what I was doing and keeping it alive. So people say, "Did you want to be an artist?" I said, "Not really. I just wanted to draw to keep things."
What age were you when you?
Well, I suppose we're talking about, I think 8, 9, 10 is that sort of age. I think when you're sort of able to represent things in a way, and you're looking to find out how to look into other sources to see how you can get better at it in a way. So I created my own inspirations, if you like, at home, and I had sort of crazes of things, but one of the things that sort of continued with me was an interest in soldiers and militaria, soldiers' uniforms, and the colour, and people would say, it's sort of heraldry, and I said, well, not really. It was the colour. It was a sort of visual thing, and that has stayed with me.
Toy lead soldiers, or?
I collected soldiers, yes. I had to be. My sister started off with a big bedroom, and then my parents realised I got so much stuff I was collecting that I had to have the big bedroom. And my father bought me what was to me an enormous sheet of sort of 5x8 hardboard, which I painted, became my battlefield, and all my toy soldiers were out on that. And I had. My grandparents, my grandfather was an Olympic.
Your mother's or grandfather's?
My mother's father was a gymnast, and he would stand on his hands every time he went round there. He was good at that. He was a parallel bars man, and my uncle Jack, who married. One of the sisters in the family was also a gymnast, so there's this sort of link between the extended families, But my grandfather had they were 7 children, and I met my great grandmother, who was in her 90s, and I remember this very dark. I don't know. She had Italian or some sort of European. She might have been Indian. It might have been Italian or Jewish. I don't know. Some sort of dark stream, and which gave her the black hair and very strong features. And I'm interested in that link because, as with lots of families, there were things that my mother called what was it? skeletons in the cupboard, you know, and there were certain people and things you didn't talk about. And I think there was an uncle sometime who had an affair with somebody, and I think we got this sort of this strain, you know, into the family. But anyway, there were seven brothers and sisters of my mother's parents, and several of them went to Australia, and I think that side of the family were timber traders. In York, doing dealings with Russia, so I think there were probably some of the family lived in Russia for a while, and so they went out all over the place. But the uncle there that I related to, who unfortunately died unfortunate for me, I was very upset because he was kind of a link for me with all sorts of things. He was I called him Uncle Ali, but he was actually Alex Catley. Not many people would know about him, but if you Google him now, you will find that there are two things. You will find cartoons that he drew of First World War incidents. And they were sort of things like a caption like "Come to the cookhouse door, boys." And it would be sort of humorous figures stumbling all over each other to get to the food, and they weren't jokes as such, but they were humorous sort of things that people would cheer people up a bit, you know. So he did whole series of those, but also in Fort now I never get the spelling of this right. It's Fort Ticonderoga or something like that in Canada. They published a set of postcards that he painted of soldiers wearing Napoleonic type uniforms of the soldiers in Canada at that time, and so he basically he'd painted the soldier's uniform, and then was sort of landscape behind. But I had a set of those he gave me. But his big thing was that he collected militaria, and he had a big house somewhere near Godalming, Guildford somewhere, and we would go down there as a family for tea. And when we got there, you know, they would say, "Okay, David, you can go off with Uncle Ali now. You know, it's all right." You know, so everybody was having tea, and I'm going up like the wardrobe. I'm going up this staircase, big staircase. At the top of the staircase, there's big glass cases filled with Napoleonic uniforms and helmets and tunics, and I'd go through all this. All this, the things that I loved, the things I loved to paint and draw, and it was all there. And he would.
How old are you then?
I'm 9, 10. So I was 11 when he died. So I was about 9 or 10 then, 8, 9, 10. And he would always, when we left, he would always give me stuff, cardboard boxes, full of badges, hat badges, bits and pieces. I have a lovely photograph of myself with a Zulu shield standing in his garden, and a spear. And shorts and socks and sandals, you know, looking incredibly serious, you know, because this is the big thing for me. And I understand why, you know, in many Africans don't want to smile when they have a photograph taken. You know, it's serious, isn't it? It's, you know, under my bed at home, I had. I mean, you can. I think you could actually keep this in here, the interview. I had 3 bayonets. And a sort of matchet and a spear and several clubs. You know, if the police could come round to my bedroom, you know, I'd have a record now.
Had he given them to you?
Yes. So he'd give them to me. Yes. I mean, who could do that now? You know, if he would be arrested and I would be. You know, everybody would have been arrested. But anyway, we had this shared interest in militaria, and he really liked having me there because he could share it and share it with somebody else.
And he was an artist as well.
And yes, so I can remember he collected cigarette cards, and those people of my age will remember when flicking cigarette cards that most of them are quite thin players, and they'd go like that. But if you had a sort of 1914 Wills card, it would go and you'd be the winner with that. You know, they were these thick cards, and there's a history, you know, in cigarette cards, and I collected them for the uniforms. I had a complete collection of the regular army and the reserves, and I would draw them all. And coming on to that in a minute, but I mean, he was a watercolor painter. So I can remember one occasion he took a cigarette card that had ripped, and he painted in the bits that were missing. You know, he knew exactly what the little feather here and the little thing hanging down the hat was what was supposed to be. So he was a watercolor painter as well. His wedding present to my mother was a painting of he asked her and he asked my mother's sister as well as wedding presents where would they like a picture of, you know. So we had the major, I suppose, bit of art we had in our house was a painting that he'd made of Beer Bay in Devon, and incidentally I went back there with my children and other children in the family, and we all sat in the place that we thought he'd painted that from, and we all did it, and that was a big sort of, you know, that was a warm sort of thing to do.
You've still got the painting? Still
got his painting. Yeah. He was he was an amateur watercolor painter. It wasn't brilliant, but that painting, you know, it's significant there. So I've got that landscape painting there. And I've got all this militaria. So those are two bits of input. And he was also he earned his money as a photographer with I think it's a London Chronicle, a paper that no longer exists. But I do have some photographs, I think, with addresses on the back, which put it somewhere, one of the streets off Fleet Street. There's no longer any. I don't know, if I went in the archive, I might be able to find something about him. But when he died. Subsequently, I did now and then go round to militaria shops and ask them if they knew Alex Catley, you know. And
they say, "Oh, his name."
So
how do you spell his name?
Alex, Alex, yes. Alexander. It was,
yes.
but everybody called him Ali.
Surname?
Catley, Cattley.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of Catleys aren't spelt like that, but it's Ttley. So that's my mother's side. Yeah. So he really was very important to me, and so he gave as well. You see, he gave me black and white photographs that he'd taken, and there was a situation where I went very sort of goose pimply. I had a job through the Royal Watercolour Society. You know, I was president of the Royal Watercolour Society for a while, and during that time, I went with. Two other painters to the Queen Mother's birthday celebrations at Whitehall, when she gathered all her the people that she sponsored, you know, the choirs, the knitting circles, you know, the cookery classes, you know, everything there, and they were all there, and I was there. Recording or doing something as the Royal Watercolour Society, because she was a patron for us, so, or matron, or whatever you would say, and so I was there with all this militaria stuff around me. So all of a sudden, all this was coming back to me. I was being had got a job, you know, to be there amongst. The uniforms and so on, and this was lovely for me. But I got myself at one point. I did drawings as much as I could, but I also knew I had to get a lot of photographs because I'd got a short amount of time, and if I was going to do something worthwhile to give to the Queen Mother, you know, I was going to have to pull something nice, good out of the bag, you know. But I positioned myself at a point where the guns and the limbers, you know, were being dragged round by the artillery in a circle, and there were at the front of them there were lifeguards on horses, you know, with their swords and helmets, you know, the helmets coming right down here, you know, and I was there on the ground taking photographs of them as they were coming up at me, you know, and it was as though I was in the front line, you know, in the trenches as it were, and I suddenly remembered at that point, as all these were coming towards me, I'm feeling it now, you know. I can remember photographs that my uncle had taken of the very same things that inspired me as a little boy, and it was like a sort of big kind of circle, coming around. I was giving it my own, own take, but also I can remember the look on the face of the horse guard, with his helmet down here, who was staring at me. I was probably in
his way.
in the way, yes. But we have to suffer for art, So that was an interesting thing, a sort of connection with my uncle Ali, and
going back to your earlier childhood. This is 8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
What is your earliest memory? Concrete memory.
My earliest memory, as funny as this, that we lived in one place, and in Potter's Bar, and moved to another place which was down the road, and there was a fence, a paling fence, that overlapped, and as a child, when you get a fence like that, this is the musical side of me, I would pick up a stick and run the stick along the fence, so it goes, and the faster you went, the higher the note was, or it would go tick, 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 so you make music on this fence. But what I can remember is that at one point the fence went this way, and the other point it went the other way. So that sort of sense that I felt that home was at the end where you did the, you understand, the laps were facing the opposite way, and that's quite extraordinary, isn't it? It's a sort of visual and an oral thing,
Yep.
thing. Yeah.
How old do you think you might have been when you were doing this?
I was able to walk, so
3 or 4.
Yeah, possibly. Yes. But of course, down there, that height, maybe the sound would be different from this height. And interestingly, from that point of view, I was up at the British Museum this week, and somebody there, an art object had been installed along next to a park where there had originally been railings, but the railings had been taken away for the war effort or what have you, and somebody had installed sounds of metal bars clunking and dropping on the ground with a different note. So when you walked along, you got bum, 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 and the quicker you walked, the faster the tune went. And that made me think back. It's interesting how these links, we make these links.
Let's come back to your childhood. Where did you first go to school?
I first went to school at Cranbourne Primary School. Yes. Do
you remember anything about it?
Yes, I can remember the tilt of the playground, which was good for dinky toys, and I can remember the walls that we flicked cigarette cards up against, and I can remember the air raid shelters that we were never allowed to go in, and I don't think they ever used them, but they looked pretty grim sort of places. I can remember doing a drawing for the teachers, several of the teachers. The first young teacher, who must have been mid-20s, I gave her a picture of all the headgear of all the British Army in rows, and I can imagine her going to the staff room and saying, "David's given me. What am I going to do with this? Anybody else want this?" And so I was, I have a lot of memories there of that, of being the one in the class where people would come up and say, look at his tiger or what have you, he's the one who could draw. I could also remember actually something, I'm not proud of this, but one of my favourite teachers there, I half-inched some chalk, some coloured chalk, blackboard chalk. I didn't need it, to draw with, and somebody told on me, and I can remember him coming round to my parents' house, or to my home, and saying, "This is unlike David. He's not a a thief." And I was so embarrassed because I really, I respected. I admired this guy, and I gave him a lovely picture of a grenadier guard, with a busby and.
How old were you at this point?
Well, then I'd have been 9 or 10, I think. Yeah. But also, that one significant thing there was I had there were 2 women teachers who they both taught in the school. One was a music teacher, I think, and the other one was our form teacher when I was before the 11 plus, and they took the class out to the Tower of London on a weekend for a school trip, and in the Tower of London, I mean, there was all this armour. Is it King Henry on horseback? I don't know. For me, it was just a dream, you know. And I was there with my sketchbook drawing, and everybody's out there waiting for me, playing football, you know, and eating their sandwiches, and I'm still in there. And they were really nice. They said, look, David, if you want to, you and a friend, come up one weekend. We'll bring you up, and you can spend all your time drawing. And I mean, I've been hooked on the museums, you see, since then. My mother had, you know, at that sort of age, she had to, well, she'd take me to a museum and kind of leave me there, you know, and go off and shop. And the Royal United Services Museum on Whitehall had terrific uniforms with all the braid, and they had all lots of models with the little of battles as well. But I mean, they were sort of quite intriguing, but it was the look of the uniforms, and I just wanted to draw them. And I actually said to my mother, she said, what would you like to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I'd like to be, you know, museum curator. Well, I want to be museum, because I just wanted to, no, I didn't know about curation. I just wanted to be there with all this stuff. You know, I would be an attendant. That would have been all right, you know. So I could have got a job as a museum attendant when I was 9, and probably done the job very well, you know, and shared it with people.
Were you in fact doing it? In other words, did you have your own little museum in your room? Did you collect things? I think
yes.
Toys, obviously.
Oh, yes.
What else do you collect?
Now, well, everything and anything, really. I mean, I collect. I collect bits of screwed up paper. Even, you know, it's pathetic, isn't it? Really. But I've got a shelf which is like a landscape of a mountainscape, and I've got a lot of triangular shaped kind of rocks and things that are all sort of standing together. I started labelling them, but I'm not really. I've got these things that I should have written on the bottom, and I've started to do that, but I'm too busy finding something else, you know, to archive it all. So and also there was something that later on got me. At a time, this was in the air. This was before Damien Hirst did his Shark, and before contemporary art had sort of moved on to that display thing in museums, you know, and just taking objects and displaying them. In the air was this sense of that I had. I was doing still life painting, and but I wasn't painting still life because I wanted to paint a bunch of apples and a bottle. Not conventionally, but I wanted to paint things, you know, like I'd always done. And I was interested in this idea of the presenting something. And when you present, and the things I wanted to paint, I painted them because I felt there was an interest and some sort of story between them, not because it was an art, an aesthetic thing. It was sort of more of a sort of personal interest thing. So the idea that a shop window is a still life, or a museum display is a still life, or somebody, you know, a workman in the street with his tools out there, you know, that's a still life. Anything which is bits and bobs and things is paintable, you know, and I don't like this kind of narrow sort of still life thing of putting things in the boxes. So when I set up all my little objects and things that I collect, I'm almost imagining I'm like a little person amongst them, and that I'm walking around between them, and that's very much a thing that I do. I mean, I haven't talked about this yet, but the paintings, when I'm painting in the museum, when I discovered the Pitt Rivers Museum, these were they were placescapes. I would see all these rows of baskets and things, and there were shadows, permanent shadows being cast by all the lighting in there, and they became like buildings, like mountains, like that you could walk between, and you went from the shadow into the light and into the shade and into the light. And there's that thing that's when you're in a piazza or somewhere and you see it and you think, oh, this is beautiful, but you want to go and sit under the umbrella because there's shade there. But seeing things in light and shade, I think, is very important for an experience of places. You know, when I go when I'm painting and travelling around, I see the shadow almost before I see what it is, and that's what happened when I went into the Pitt Rivers Museum. I saw the light and the shade, and that kind of is exciting. If you take the objects out and put them on their own, bland, they're kind of nothing. So the context is important, you know, with things, and the conversation between them is important. So I'm not being scientific about this. I'm being visual, and I'm being experiential about it. So going back to you asked about the objects. For me, the objects are a sort of they're a reference, not this in themselves, but to other things. So bringing back a stone from a La Gomera, for example, where I've been doing some painting, teaching painting. There are all sorts of rocky landscapes. When you pick up a rock, it looks like the landscape in miniature. You pick up a bit of a prickly pear that's all been eaten away, you know, and that looks like the landscape. Or you stand with a palm tree bang in front of you, and all the striations on the tree echo the lines behind. So I don't know where this all starts and where it begins. You know, this is where I am sort of now. But shall we go back to the beginning?
Well, let's go back to 11 plus.
Yes.
Which you took. Did that mean that you went on to a grammar school?
Now here, this is. I want this to go down. This is. I want this there. I have to tell you that my full family name was David Paskett Smith, and my father's name was Smith. The Catley was on my mother's name on the other side. Now there were a lot of David Smiths. I've met a lot of David Smiths in my life. I've met David Smiths doing the same job as me, and it seemed to me later on a good idea. I just got rid of the Smith. I mean, there is a famous David Smith sculptor who I admire, but I found myself as a musician, which I also do at times, playing with in other bands, you know, where there was a David Smith in this band, you know. So at some point I got rid of the Smith, so it became David Paskett, which was a family name anyway, you know. But the point I'm coming to here is that I was in the top stream at 11 in the primary school, and all of my friends in that class went off to grammar schools. I was sent to the local comprehensive school, and I arrived in the bottom stream amongst people who couldn't read. And
why?
I think there was a clerical error, and because another David Smith, you know, who couldn't read, went to the grammar school.
Because you didn't pass your 11 plus.
Because yes, it appears I didn't pass my 11 plus. Yeah. You know, my parents, I don't know whether they thought about this. I did sort of vaguely imply it to my mother later. I didn't want to upset her. You know, I mean, this is not something you would like to carry with you, is it? And it didn't really dawn on me for years that there was another David Smith, you know, somewhere else. You know, my what do you call it? My doppelganger, who was you know struggling, you know, to sort of correct some sort of logarithmic sort of I don't know. So I got swiftly moved up to the you know, to the top streams, the grammar school stream within the comprehensive. Well, actually, what happened? This was in a way was quite good, because this was Mount Grace Comprehensive School in Potters Bar, and a lot of the parents in the upper streams were very pro. They were kind of left-wing intellectual artists and architects and all sorts of people who lived in Hampstead or Highgate and Barnet, and they wanted their children to mix with me, you know, the oi polloi. And you know, the thing I remember about school was, you know, keep your head down and keep out of trouble. You know, in it, on it, done it. But I did. I was lucky in a sense that through the school, I chose my own program at the end, really. So I decided that I want through various channels that I wanted to go to art college, and the quickest thing was to get there at 17 and just take one A level and go. But the school allowed me to just basically paint, and get a few O levels, and at school, I was good at painting other kids sitting on tables on chairs, figure drawings, and I can remember doing a big mural of a Ban the Bomb March with lots of sort of bearded priests and musicians and things in it, so I was very conscious of the sort of social things there as well, and also I had this terrific interest in music and skiffle, folk music, and so on. I was playing in skiffle groups, I was playing in folk bands with other musicians, and I gave an incredibly boring speech to the sixth formers about Appalachian folk music, and I can remember they all gradually left and the teacher was there, so very good, David. So yes.
You were there,
a few less examples I think next time.
You were there in the Lonnie Donegan revolution.
Lonnie Donegan was my hero. Yeah.
I played in a skiffle group.
You played in a skiffle group, did you?
Yeah, with Lonnie Donegan. I mean, not with him, but yeah.
With him. No, I went to the Finsbury Park Empire a couple of times to see him. No, he was my hero. Yeah, and I quickly went on. I mean, through that, his singing the blues and his singing Irish songs. I mean, he was right across the board. Yeah.
We'll have lots to talk about outside this interview, but school. This is often the time I talk to people about religion, because I haven't asked about your parents' religious feelings, but usually people, if they're going to be confirmed and they're Anglican, this is 14, 15, and even if not, this is the age when people often go through a kind of spiritual period.
Right.
What part has religion played in your life?
Well, at that stage, I sang in the church choir. I had a quite nice little soprano voice, and we had a very it was Potter's Bar, the church, King Charles the Martyr Church, had quite a committed choir master who played the organ rather violently, as organists tend to do. So I attended morning service and communion and evensong.
So you were confirmed?
So I was confirmed. I also had a little badge for the Royal School of Music, church music, hang around my neck. And I mean, I don't know what my parents were doing on Sunday, but I was sent to church to the choir. I think it was a way of a little bit, in a sense. My mother went to the church, but my father, he never talked about it very much, and he would, he'd get high days and holidays, he would go, but I don't think he was really religious. But my mother was, because I can remember my mother saying when my sister had a baby that the baby had to be christened, because if the baby wasn't christened, that little soul was going to be floating around in limbo and ether, and that she would never be happy. And I thought, oh dear. But at that time, when I went through the confirmation thing, and I think I felt spiritual in a sense, but I was very quickly sorting out this Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and I thought, this doesn't work. And so when I was at school and starting to go to art college, I went really being quite a serious sort of person, about the faith thing, but I identified with there was this honest to God time, and all these people I painted on my Ban the Bomb March, they were bearded priests and things, so I kind of had this idea that you could be cutting edge, but also be sort of a Christian and spiritual, and I was trying to mixing and matching it, but I pretty quickly when I started at art college, I taught myself out of it. So 17, it all went, and I've been non-religious sense, although I would pick up bits from other religions. I think I identify most with the I Ching, if I pronounce that correctly. I mean, I find that more inspiring as a reference book than the Bible in a sense. I mean, it's not a stock. It's I think I'm interested in the ideas of things and the circular nature of things, how one thing leads to another, and the Bible doesn't do that, but I Ching does that. And does this answer the religious sort of question? But I am married to a Jewish woman, and so and I have two daughters who are Jewish, and I don't follow it, but I sort of embrace it in a sense, you know. And a lot of my friends are Jewish, and I'm playing Jewish music, as I was saying to you. I played it all last week, so I have that sort of structure of morality, sort of structure, which is to do with the various Western religions, I guess.
The other thing that sometimes happens around that time is politics. In other words,
yes.
you mentioned ban the bomb marches and so on.
Yes.
Were you beginning to get interested in politics at all?
I was confused because you know, I realise I'm not a joiner in a way. I see I'm either an outsider on the inside or an insider on the outside. I've never quite worked out which one. But when I was at school, one day I put the badge on, you know, and then I put it on the other lapel, and then I take it off. I wasn't quite sure whether I want to be identified, because I didn't really. I believed in it, you know, that you know, at that age, you know, well, at all ages, one is against killing and mass. You know, and wiping out of whole populations. I mean, all that sort. But on the other hand, the issue of defence and protection, and you know, what do you do if your family is being carried off? You know, do you stand up there and do you fight, or do you just let them do it? So there are all those sort of questions were around then and confusing me. I did go though when we were at college at Hornsey. We all went en masse to the American embassy when things were happening in Cuba.
I was there too. Well, not the Cuba, the Vietnam.
Right. Yes.
Later, 67, 68. But you went to the Cuba.
I went to the Cuba one. Yeah.
62, 63.
Yeah. So I was at Hornsey College of Art in North London then. Yeah.
Well, tell me now about Hornsey.
Well, when I went there, I mean, I was going by bus or train each day. I mean, just that was good for me, because I associate with those train rides with paperbacks, because coming from a sort of atmosphere, I wasn't amongst people who read, you know, much, and at that time, Penguin had gone orange and had started having illustrations on the covers, and that was the time I was going to college, and so I would feel really good sitting in the train reading Plato, or reading Room at the Top, or you know, whatever. There was that mixture of writers coming in, and I was reading Bertrand Russell, or you know, I was reading all these different things, because all this was being fed into me at Hornsey, because it was very good. It wasn't. I went. I couldn't believe I was going there to draw all day. You know, that I just felt like my ship had come home. You know, it wasn't work. You know, it was terrific for me. And but there's all these other little inputs, and I went there at a crossover time when I arrived. I was doing pre-diploma for the National Diploma in Art and Design, and that was kind of a rigorous thing where you started off life drawing and going outside drawing natural forms, and you would bring your outside drawing things back and create a picture with a number of figures in it, you know. So it was figurative painting really, and then you went on to in a bigger way to do this. So the NDD was about painting figures in groups really, and then I was there when the whole art education thing switched round, and they wanted to it became the Dip AD, and I moved on to the pre-diploma, so I got an extra year actually in there, and I was only 17 when I started, so everybody else was about my age when it came on, and I was there with Ray Davies from the Kinks. We used to sit in the life room together, play the guitar, and he came out to our folk. We were running a folk club as well in Potter's Bar then, you know, cutting edge stuff, and a lot of famous musicians passed through, you know, Billy Connolly and Peggy Seeger and Ewan McCall and the Paskett Family, you know, all sorts of people. But anyway, that's another story. I had the advantage of the course upping itself into a sort of degree level, so that there were a lot more. There's a lot more talk about not just the history of art, but about just the philosophy and film and design, and I mean all different aspects, so that we were supposed to be much broader, you know, a broader approach. And the awful word at that time was interesting. You know, whatever you did was interesting. Sorry?
It's about 1962 this is happening.
I'm not very good at maths. I have to do it with my fingers this one. Yes, yes, 62, yes.
It's
yes.
The Beatles.
Yes,
time.
Yes. I mean, I can remember sitting in the cafe, you know, up the road from hearing the next Beatles song, and it was probably Twist and Shout or something that sort of time.
Early time,
yeah, Twist and Shout. But at our college hops, it was rhythm and blues was coming in there, quite sort of heavy stuff. There was, I wasn't aware of any. I mean, I'm sure there was drug taking going on around, but I wasn't aware of it. You know, I didn't smoke. And I never got involved in that side of things, but I'm sure it was there sort of in the background a bit, you know. I just wanted to draw and paint, you know, and play music, so I never got, they were my high, you know, so I never needed really to go down other routes, you know.
Were there any teachers either at the Comprehensive or at Hornsey who you particularly remember and influenced you?
Yes. At Hornsey, there were a few people. There was somebody there called Morley Berry, who is not really very, very famous. I have Googled it. I Google these people, you know, to see whether I can find something about them. But he was respected, and I know he used to exhibit on Hampstead Heath on the weekends in Hampstead. This wasn't a sort of Bayswater Road railing sort of painting. This was serious artists used to hang, well, no, not that there aren't serious artists on Bayswater Road, but you know what I mean. These were Hampstead artists who wanted somewhere to show, and I can remember seeing his near the pond at Hampstead. But anyway, he painted sort of a little bit somewhere between abstract expressionism and an Ivan Hitchens sort of landscapey feeling of being in a landscape thing. But I can remember him on a natural form class holding up some burnt paper and turning it around in his hand, you know, or you know, shells or natural forms, bones and things, and holding them up and looking out through them, and this really was an inspiration, because he got very excited when he was talking about it, and he also, there was one occasion where he just gave us all, you know, a brown potato and red and yellow and blue paint. Now, you know, you've got to paint the potato in those three colours, and that was a brilliant exercise, you know. I mean, it's something I would still do, you know, if I was teaching people, to find all those different shades of browny greys and things in a potato. So he was very good. But then others in a sort of different way. And I can remember somebody who is now a Royal Academician still alive, Fred Cumming, I look at his paintings now, and it reminds me of a walk. We were walking through Finsbury Park in the rain, in the sort of mist, and we were just sort of walking. And he was a very nice man, but he was quite quiet. I can't remember him saying a lot really, but I can remember him pointing to a telephone box down the bottom of the hill, you know, a little red rectangle, and somebody with a dog just walking away from it. He said, look. And I always think of that. It's that sort of the mist of a park, you know, and in the distance, bing, bong, you know, two little things, you know, and so I can remember that. But there's and then there was another teacher who was the drawing master at Ruskin, David Tyndall. He was there, and I can remember as I was drawing a roof with tiles, he'd just keep coming in and say more, you know, an hour later, more, you know, more, and maybe that, you know, had quite an influence, and also, I can remember one of the teachers who used his hands. He had the table when he was talking about things, and he would gradually bring his hands down towards the table, and you were on tenterhooks waiting for him for the climax of his sentence, and then eventually when they came down, and he would lift himself away. So this was almost like Tai Chi, he was like this sort of movement, and so you knew when he was making his point when the hand just gently touched the table, but he wasn't banging the table, when I saw his paintings, it gradually sort of dawned on me. They were abstract paintings of long lines that like shooting stars between little red dots, like on parcels. You have string on a parcel. You wrap it up and then you sit the old parcel. But he's kind of flattened them, so they were like constellations of these sort of things, and it's this sort of mapping sort of thing. And so I remember I can remember the actions of my teachers, as much as anything they said, and I'm very aware of that now with hands and things, how hands reflect people's personality, and how important they are just in the communication thing, and how important touch is in paintings. That when you paint something, you want to make people feel as if they can actually touch what it is.
Let's move on from art college. What happened at the end of that?
Well, I was at Hornsey for 2 years. Yeah. I then, at that point, another situation which that point is one. When I look back, I think what would have happened if I'd hadn't done that. That made that decision, because I think my life might have taken a completely different turn, or else it might have gone off and come round eventually to where I am now. It's that's something we will never know. But during the second year, ICI had invented polystyrene, and they'd invented vacuum forming presses, and they weren't out on the market yet. And they approached Hornsey, because we're a bunch of young creative people, and they wanted us to make things out of polystyrene and plastic forming things. So I was in a group who was given a plaster block and some bits of rods and sheets of brass or something metal, and the things that I'd made out of this in this group, people pounced on me and said, okay, we'll take him away, we'll use him. So I was extracted from the regular course that everybody was doing to do a bit of window dressing for ICI and the college, which was good for me. I made a piece of abstract sculpture which was rather like a Rachel Whiteread, a cross between a Rachel Whiteread and a derelict building from war. I can remember going around Barbican and seeing buildings, where you had after the war you saw all the wallpaper and fireplaces of the rooms, where that side had dropped off, and you could see through and out the other side. And I can remember I mixed that up with being on the beach making sandcastles and making holes in them and reaching through and grabbing my cousin's hands coming through from the other side, that sort of thing. And I made this 5 by 5 by 8 big block sculpture out of polystyrene, which I then painted over with cement stuff, and that was in Courtaulds Gallery, advertised, backing up ICI's sort of discovery. And also with clay, I had imprinted circular shapes on a slab, which looked like bubbles basically, and this was put into a plastic vacuum forming machine and sucked around it. So I covered a wall with repetitions of these sheets. So anyway, that what that did was, while all the others, I was doing this, all my mates were away painting, and I wanted to be painting, and I was doing this. So it then came to the point where I had to decide at the end of the year, I had to apply for which course I wanted to do, and I applied for the painting course, and they said, well, where's the painting? I said, well, you didn't let me do it. You made me do sculpture. But she said, you've got a place in the sculpture department. We're giving you a place in the sculpture department. I said, but I want to do painting, you know. So I was angry at that point. This was before all the protests at Hornsey College of Art. You know, there were a lot of protests. A lot of this was all bubbling, you know, the way we were being used for you know, they took on too many students. They hadn't got places for them and all this sort of thing. So we kind of felt we were being used. And I thought, I won't swear, but, you know, I decided to go somewhere else. And I went to Exeter College of Art, which in the country, a small college. And I regret going to what, in a sense, was I went to be a big fish in a small pool, where I think I would have been better off staying at Hornsey and doing the sculpture. So I went down there, and that was a big. I often think back. A lot of the time I'm making sculptural things, and I think in 3 dimensions, and and I'm very interested in objects, and I think I understand sculpture when I look at it in a way more in some ways than I do painting. So. I feel I'm there again. I'm like an outsider on the insider, or an insider on the outsider. So there we go. Yeah.
So you did 2 years at Exeter, or
3? I did 3 years at Exeter. So there I was in the landscape, and I wanted then to go back to being more of a figurative painter. I was painting landscape, and I was doing stained glass as well. That I really was interested in, and I was painting stained glass at a start in a more abstract way. When I started at Exeter, I was painting abstract, brightly coloured, formal, geometric things, and I think they were good. I then wanted to be more figurative, and I started painting trees, and I got irritated with myself, and I think I felt a bit there. So I didn't get a terrific pass there, you know. I just got an ordinary kind of pass. So I think in a way I was just a bit disappointed, but the staff were happy with me, and I got a Queen's Award to go and travel in Italy while I was there, and that has started me on something. I spent a couple of months in Italy, going around all the northern Renaissance towns, and comparing the towns with the painters, the Piero della Francesca and Masaccio and Mantegna and all these people, and that was big input. And actually as well, while I was there, we had an association with the Exeter University, and an extraordinary man called Professor Molwyn Merchant was there in the English department. He was an inspiration. He was a priest and a writer and so on, and he came down to give us creative writing sort of classes. And I can remember him. I'd written a poem about leaving London, not leaving Cambridge, and he gave me an academic, you know, criticism breakdown, you know, and I was very impressed with that, and it gave me a lot of confidence, and I carried on writing songs and things then. So there was quite a lot of we were allowed to do, in a sense, to do what we wanted in there. So it wasn't bad. And then I thought after that, I thought, well, what do we do now? I better get a teaching qualification just to make sure I've got a living. So I then went to Liverpool to a course that was run between the university and the art college. So I lived in Liverpool for a year, and spent a lot of time at the Everyman Theatre in the basement, you know, listening to Roger McGough and Brian Patton and Adrian Henry, and going to the Philharmonic, drinking Liverpool beer, and being sworn at because I was a Londoner, you know, by the locals and so on. But then,
this is about 66.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that.
You're about 22.
Yes. Well done. You're thinking mathematically while I'm doing this. So Liverpool was good in the sense that the teaching, I mean, I couldn't believe, you know, straight away we were put into classes. There wasn't much preamble, you know. We were out there teaching very quickly, and I taught 8-year-olds, you know, for a day, and came back and slept straight away. First, I mean, I really appreciated what teachers did then, and I was quite lucky in a sense, in that I wasn't put in really rough schools. I was put in John Lennon's school, where all a lot of the teachers were priests, and they used to roam the corridors with their robes tied in knots, you know, swinging them around and beating people. All the teachers had some sort of weapon in their drawer, you know, and there were all these kids there who were really energetic. I enjoyed it really, and then so that was for a year.
And then what?
Then I put out several applications for teaching jobs, and one of the applications I put out was to Norwich. I had put them all over the place, but as it happened, my parents were uprooting from Potter's Bar and moved. And at that time, I was at Liverpool. They were living in a caravan up in Norfolk, while their house was being built. They had just on the spur of the moment. Property prices and land was very cheap in those days in Norfolk, and for £1,000 they bought a plot of land and waited while it was built, and they moved up there, and I got the job. I got a job at Heartsease Secondary School in Norwich as the head of a department straight away. It wasn't a big school. It was then about 450 pupils, and I had 3 other people under me, but they were just part-time teachers. And so I was. The school was trying to up itself. It was there was a very good, strong sort of headmaster, and he gave me quite a lot of allowed me initiative to do what I wanted, and I got on very well with the older part-time teachers. I learnt a lot from them. One of them was a painter, a member of the Norwich 20 group, which is a group of local artists, and I joined him, and I became a member of that group. He was a lot older than me, but that was good. I was there full time at that school for 2 years to gain my qualification, as it were, for teaching qualification. And then I went to headmaster and said, "Look, can I come in on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and paint and have a couple of days off?" He said, "Well, as long as you find me a replacement," he said. Well, I found somebody else who I admired, a painter friend, came over and took over the department, and I had a nice part-time. I was singing in a Greek restaurant in the evenings, and that's when I got interested in Greek music. But I was just singing around the tables, and I had an exhibition that year of painting. So I was doing all these things, and interested in Norfolk and Norwich, and now where are we there? I can remember buying Joni Mitchell records were coming in, so that can give you a does that place you?
67. It's about the student uprising time. It's just beginning to warm up in Paris and London and so on.
And also I was buying Greek records, and at that time the generals were in power, so I was listening to music, of Theodorakis music that they couldn't listen to in Greece. So that was
So how long did you do that for?
Which
the Norwich teaching?
Well, I was there for 3 years, and I then, because I was getting interested in the music, I had this sort of idea at some point that maybe what I could do is earn my living as a musician to pay for my painting, and I didn't want to be a teacher, I can remember going into the school in the morning and walking along the road and looking at the postman. Oh, can I have your job? And the guy sweeping there. Oh, can you give me your job? I wanted something. The pressure of all those rebellious kids in the class. Overnight, some nice little kid would become an ogre. And I didn't want all that discipline and organisational stuff. I didn't think I was a bad teacher, but I wanted to do my own thing, as they used to say. So Bristol seemed to be attracting musicians as a sort of centre, singer-songwriters and so on. It seemed to have a sort of a culture of this there, and Bristol seemed to be a good place to go to the West Country, or to go to London, or to go to the Midlands or something. It seemed to be a good centre. But anyway, I headed down there, and I moved all my furniture that I had in the flat, and put it in different people's houses, and I went to stay in Bath for a little while. But I realised that Bath was lovely as it wasn't kind of edgy enough, and it wasn't alive enough. So I then realised I had to get some money. So I went back into teaching again. In Bristol, I went to Ashton Park School in Bristol, and I had a part-time job there. But the job was teaching collage embroidery. So in the evening, I was learning how to do. I was running stitch, and and I was working out how to use a sewing machine and all sorts of things, you know. But the head of the what was happening this time was that, you know, the schools were trying to not just do painting, but have all sorts of things for the kids to do. So I was basically using fabric, and I used a lot of glue actually, as well as stitching. I have to admit. Copy decks. The room smelt, you know. It wasn't like the Secatine we had at school, the stuff you got high on. I don't know whether copy decks affected you, but anyway, I then at that point I was singing in the local clubs and writing songs, and I then took on the teacher at that school asked me if I would become full-time teacher, and I don't know what I thought. I just said yes. But during that year, one of the best things I did in my life was I got a mortgage on a little house, so that I had my own sort of studio space. And I can remember going to the mortgage company and them saying, they said, "What does a young man on his own, single young man, want with a house?" Well, I want to live in it. I want to paint in it. You know, it's my workspace. Anyway, they gave me a mortgage, and in that year I was able to rent out rooms. So I was in a situation then to take a risk, because I got a base, and I got a sort of regular income. And at that time, a band called the Pigsty Hill Light Orchestra, who were a sort of comedy band, needed a member to replace somebody that was leaving, and I joined them. So the second half of that year, I was going out doing gigs all over the country and coming back at 3 o'clock in the morning and getting up and going teaching. And at the end of that year, I just got rid of the teaching and went off with the band. When you're a child, you think you're normal, you know, because you're the norm. Everybody else is a bit crazy. But looking back now, I kind of think I must have been a bit odd, well, different, shall we say. And there was something that I used to do, and I think I'm still doing it in a funny way. I because of my love of armour and knights in armour and uniforms and that sort of thing, I made myself a suit of armour out of cardboard, and I got sort of silver paint, and I actually made myself out of a sheet, a robe. I looked like a crusader, and I had a lance and I had a shield, and I got a pram, an old pram set of wheels, and I took all my kit and I went on a campaign out in the street, and I would walk down the street in suburbia, in Potter's Bar, down Allendale Crescent, along by the grass verge with all the dog shit in it, you know, and past all the various houses, and I would go off with in my armour, with my trolley, you know, with all the gear on it, and I'd set up camp down this corner of the street, you know, between Brooklands Gardens and Allendale Crescent, and then people would step over me. I'm not quite sure what I did when I was there. I don't think I drew or anything, but I just imagined I was, you know, on a crusade or something, and then I would go off down to some other street corner.
How old were you then? How old were you?
Oh, about 30. No, I was... I don't know. I must have. Would it be about 10 or something like that? I mean, when I was older, you know, it's this thing of being self-conscious in that. You know, when one was an adolescent, you know, you would have dreamt of doing anything like that. But once again, like having the, you know, having had slept in a bed with several bayonets and matchets and things underneath the bed. There I was going around the street and setting up camp on a street corner, like, you know. And then, I mean, I can remember also feeling quite comfortable when I was at art college in the middle of Camden Town, sitting on the pavement, drawing and painting. And when I go out, if I go out plein air painting, you know, with my gear, you know, after a while you've been sitting somewhere, you somehow feel you own it anyway. You're sort of out on a sort of campaign, you know.
Lovely.
Yeah.
What I would really like to do now is to fast forward to two events. One is your drawing in the Pitt Rivers Museum. Can you tell me something about how that happened and what it was?
sort of a mixed sort of sequence. I'll try and think of it in order. I had been in living in Hong Kong for nearly 4 years, and I had initially, before I went to Hong Kong, I had been painting still lives, loosely still lives, but I mean they were big heaps of objects that I set up in my studio, and they were stacked up. They were stacked up. I mean, some of them were stacked up like a theatre. So you had the front of the stage, and you had the things in the middle of the stage, and the things at the top. They were all, but these were things I collected because of their shape and because of their colour, not because of they actually had anything to do anything. So they were just bars of soap and a billiard cue, chalk, and backs of frames, the backs of a lot of things, because it started when I went to San Gimignano, and I was painting the front of the cathedral, and this lovely sort of peeling surface of the plaster and so on, and just that triangular shape, that simple shape of the front of the building, and I sat there and just enjoyed painting that sort of surface, and I wanted to sort of recreate almost something like that, a sort of flat architectural sort of structure that I could in my studio to paint. So I just collected stuff, so a lot of things were like cardboard. I used to go to antique shops and get the cardboard boxes that things were in, except other than the things, and all these things I'd stack up. So these were sort of still lives, but the sort of thing, you could find bits and pieces that one might see in an allotment, the way people recycle things, and an allotment shed becomes bits of old broken glass and mesh and things stuck together, and things that have no use in the house end up there, so it's I just sort of found objects that have some sort of worn sort of surface. So I was making these. Then I went to Hong Kong, and I didn't need to construct them. It's on the street, the shops and things. I mean, I sat out in the street there, and things were arranged there, to sell, not for aesthetic reasons, but they're lined up to show what they've got, So had all this sort of given stuff, and also then in China I found that things on the street that I wanted to paint it. So almost when I went to China and Hong Kong, it was almost as though I was finding what I'd been looking for a long time, as though I was like this sort of I was a jigsaw puzzle, and when I went there I found new pieces that were me, and I'd stick them on me, and I gradually put me together. So I wasn't going out there looking for the sights. I wasn't looking to see. In a sense, I was enjoying seeing another culture, but in a way I was finding finding myself in it. So after having come back then from Hong Kong, I came back, and I got married at that point to Sally that I was with in Hong Kong with, and we had the children, and we were living in Bristol. But at that point I was remembering my interest in museums, and I wanted to get back into museums. So from Bristol I was going up to the Science Museum, and I spent a lot of time drawing things in the Wellcome collection, treatment of the First World War wounded, a massive case with bandages and boxes and all sorts of bits and pieces that would be taken out for a field medicine in the First World War or something like this. And these weren't arranged too artistically, so I was able just to paint them. So in the Science Museum I was looking. I mean, I used to go to the Science Museum, as a student, and I loved the museums. That was a lovely thing about being at Hornsey College of Art. When we went out drawing, we went to Science Museum, we went to the Natural History Museum, and I can remember all those places. I can remember what they sound like, and I can remember the weather when I was there, all these things. So the museums for me are sort of rich. They're not dead, They're places where, for me, I make my connections as well as the connections they're trying to make me make. So to me, if a museum is too arranged, then they kind of block out the creative thing for me. But anyway, the Science Museum I was going to, and then I suddenly met through a relative somebody who said, who who had worked at the Pitt Rivers Museum, and then he went and took over I think it was the Mary Rose or some other project. But he said, you must go there. And so I took a trip from Oxford to the Pitt Rivers Museum. And I went in, wow, I just felt like I'd come home, And so I went up and I took things out of the cases, and they allowed me to do some drawings. But in a sense, that wasn't what I wanted to do. And my wife and I were not. We'd lived in Bristol together before Hong Kong for a little while. We both lived there separately in Bristol, and so we felt, in a sense, I think we felt when we got married, maybe the possibility of starting somewhere new together. And I was going to the Pitt Rivers Museum, and we together thought, well, let's just go. So we just left and went to Oxford, and I spent the first year there in the museum. And basically, the thing with artists is that you don't know what you want to do really until you've done it. And I think this is the problem with academic research and so on. You have to put forward some proposal and have a paper and have an aim. I don't. So I really just I turned up, and I asked the museum guys at the front of the desk, can I come in and do some drawing? Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. And so gradually, I was going in the mornings when the museum was open, and then they allowed me to come in the afternoons, and I got friendly with various members of staff who came and saw me, and gradually I met all the people there. I met the director and so on, and they kind of got used to me being there. When we started, I was only allowed to use pencil. Then I was allowed to use Pastel pencils, and then I was allowed to bring a file no bigger than a test tube of water in, as long as I put plastic up on the floor around me, and we were protecting the floor, so gradually they kind of realised that I wasn't, a wild, messy painter, and I had plastic up and a sort of fence around me, and became part of the scene really. But I went in every day from 10 till 4, and the lovely thing there. What I loved about the Pitt Rivers was the way things were just all put together like families in the cases, and that's the way rather one looked at them as families, rather like a Giorgio Morandi painting, where you've got you might start to even personalise the objects, but the shadows were also integral. And I got interested in the idea of the levels that I was painting, that the idea when you look down on something, that your angle looking down gave you the sense that you were mapping things, something that's like a plane, and you could see everything and you see where you're going. Then when you bring it up slightly, it comes to a level where you're walking through it, so you come from this point to that point. So, and then the next level, it's like on an altar, and you're revering this thing, and it elevates the objects. So there's a sort of drama there. So all these things, they become it becomes interesting, not because the objects are what they are, but kind of what the whole thing, what happens when you put them all together. And I went back there to look at some exhibits, because I still live in Oxford, and I went in and thought. I took a photograph of one of the paintings I'd done with me, and after all that time, the shadows were in the same place, let alone the objects.
Wonderful. We haven't got too much more time, but I'd like to hear about your engagement with China.
Yes.
When did you go, and why did you go, and how long? What have you been doing there?
Well, the first trip was because I was in Hong Kong. And 1986, and I was painting in Hong Kong, and at that time not many people were travelling in China, and adventurous business people, and in the 1980s, really I think you had to be very sort of brave or slightly foolhardy or business ambitious to go there. But I went the first trip was to Guilin, and one saw what you thought Chinese paintings were about. You know, you saw these lumps in the landscape, and that was kind of magical. But the thing that I specifically remember was that sort of sense of going back into the 50s in England or something like this, and the sort of I felt I was in another age and another time, and it was the contemporary Chineseness of it, not the traditional Chinese of it, that was striking me, and then I saw some paintings in Hong Kong by Wu Guangdong, and he was painting in a sort of slightly abstracted but figurative way, and flattening things, and I thought that was quite interesting. But he had painted water towns, and this looked interesting to me, and so I was at a party. There's a little aside here that if you want to earn your living as a painter, it's a good job to go to somewhere where there's people who make money, not an artist colony. You know, so being in Hong Kong was actually quite a good place to be, because I had my wife, girlfriend then, was she was a dentist, and she showed people books of my photographs, and so with suggesting that it might hurt more if they didn't they didn't buy one. I had a book of photographs of my paintings, and at a party I met the editor of a travel magazine, an in-flight magazine, and he said, well, what are your plans? And I said, well, actually, I'd quite like to go up the Grand Canal and paint the water towns in China. And he said, well, why don't we commission you to do a few prints and pay for the trip, and write an article about you. So then I spent 6 weeks, I think, and I went and I took boats and so on, and I started in Hangzhou and went to Suzhou and Wuxi and Changzhou, and I came off at the top and went to Shanghai. I think I went to Shaoxing and a lot of the Zhujiajiao and Zhouzhuang and a lot of these places. So that area, as a result of that trip, I had an exhibition in Hong Kong at the Arts Centre, and sort of in a way didn't look back then, because since then I've Hong Kong has been a sort of, if you like, a sort of market for me, in a sense that. It combined the fact that people wanted souvenirs, but it also allowed me to do aesthetically what I wanted to do. So people might not have known how good the painting was, that they'd bought, but it reminded them of somewhere. So then, from living in Hong Kong, I would periodically go into China and go to different places, and somebody say, "Have you been here? Have you been there?" And I would go for a few weeks and come back.
How many times do you think you've been?
I've lost count. I wouldn't know. I mean, when I came back after Hong Kong, I would probably be going back on average once a year, I suppose. Sometimes twice a year, sometimes not a year. But at first, when I went to China, I mean, I didn't meet artists. I was in the street just looking. I was more of a anthropologist sort of person, but gradually later I got to know artists, and now I go back and I go back and paint with students, and I know professors, and I get to teach in places, and I get invited to various art academies to talk to them, and like in next October I'm going to Shenyang University, and with a bunch of paintings I'm going to exhibit there, and then I'm going out somewhere, I think Hunan, to paint with them, but we also have an exhibition in Inner Mongolia, which I've never been to, and we'll be there for a few days with the exhibition. So this thing just sort of grows. You keep pulling the thread. I never know where I'm going to be going, really.
Have you still got most of the paintings you did?
No.
You've sold most of them?
I've sold most of them, yes. I mean, I've got a few that I don't want to get rid of.
Did you photograph them before you sold them? Or?
I've got photographs of most, yes. I've not been the brilliant archivist, but this is something that as one gets older, one realises one has to do. I mean, my early paintings, I've got no reference of, but yeah, I've got.
How many paintings do you think you've done in China, mainland China?
Well, the book that I made, it's now 10 years ago now, I think the book came out. There were 250 paintings in there, I think. I don't know, probably about, I don't know, 800 or I don't know, 1,000 possibly. But that if we said 1,000 paintings and drawings maybe, or maybe it's 5. I don't know. But I fill up sketch drawing books. In fact, I had a bit of a salutary experience. At a certain age, I had a heart problem which is solved. Hope. But at that point, I slowed down because of the medicine, and I started just sitting in places, watching and drawing, and which is what I love doing. That really is my hobby now, and just to sit somewhere and watch people and draw. It doesn't really matter where or what it is. I've got hundreds of drawings.
Did you take photographs as well?
Well, yes. Most of the paintings I do are these days from photographs. Although I paint when I'm out, and the sort of painting I do is different than when I'm on the spot. It's much kind of freer and much looser, and I may be, and the actual subject matter is different. Maybe when I see a mass of things on the pavement that I want to paint, and they make a big pattern and there's lots of detail, the only way to do that is to take a photograph or take lots of photographs, because often I'm working out what's the image is going to be while I'm there. So I take lots of views of the same thing, and I take them, bring them back with me. Of course, in the old days, for me, what I call the old days, I would come back with a lead wallet full of film, to sort of lug through the customs. Now you can take thousands of these things. I don't know how I managed to do it, with so few pictures.
And you've still got all those
the photographs,
yeah,
somewhere. Well, I think I have, but the trouble is now this silly iCloud business. They if I don't pay the money, they probably disappeared up there. They're probably floating around in the ether somewhere. I-ether, call it.
Well, I always end, and I hope perhaps we'll be able to continue in various things, because there's lots of other questions I'd like to ask you. But was there anything that you really would have liked me to ask you? One question I sometimes ask is, if you were advising a young person like my granddaughter Lily about the future in art and painting, what advice would you give them? That's a possible kind of your philosophy of life stuff.
Yeah, I do a bit of teaching on painting holidays now. I mean, and that I enjoy. I don't, I just do a few, and I have people who are not professional people. They're doing it because they want to. And the thing that I say to them, and the thing I say to myself as well, is that you asked me about my philosophy, and the old Frank Sinatra thing. In a way, the philosophy that the thing is, when you're painting, you do it, and you be who you are. So it's do, be, do, be, do, be, do, be, do. And I feel it, and I've been playing music all last week. Well, and I think it's the same thing. You can learn all these techniques. You can look at other people's paintings. You think, I want to be like that. I want to be this, and I want to do this. But the thing is that really the best you can be is 100% yourself. So try and get rid of the things that stop you being what you are able to do, and that stop you being 100% yourself. That's really it. And I think that drawing, and the other thing, draw anything.
Yeah. That's a very nice point to end. Thank you very much.